Picture this. You're standing right in the middle of the Kamakya Temple in North India. And it's not some quiet, tranquil tourist spot.
No, definitely not. It's an incredibly intense environment.
Right. It's literally one of the most spiritually charged places on the entire planet.
Hmm.
It's dedicated to the Mahavidyas, which are, the 10 tantric goddesses of wisdom. And the atmosphere is just meticulously designed to completely overwhelm your sensory processing.
Oh, absolutely.
The air is unimaginably thick with heat and humidity. There's this intoxicating heavy scent of burning incense, camphor and marigolds just coating the back of your throat. And the chanting is relentless.
Just a wall of sound.
Exactly. Hypnotic chanting echoing off the stone and bells ringing in this continuous overlapping wave. You literally feel the vibration right through your rib cage.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the accounts of early mystics like Sri Ramakrishna, they frequently describe these temple environments as places where the veil between the physical and subtle realms is just paper thin. Every single element, from the frequency of those bells to the specific olfactory triggers of the incense, it's all calibrated.
Right.
It forces you into the immediate present moment in a way that just feels ancient and undeniable.
I can practically feel that atmosphere just talking about it. So you're entirely swept up in this profound ancient devotion, but then right at the peak of this experience, you witness something that brings the whole transcendent moment to a screeching, visceral halt, a ritual slaughter.
Which is incredibly confronting.
A real, bloody, undeniable sacrifice of a massive horned animal right there on the temple grounds.
It's confronting not just for someone looking through a modern secular lens, but specifically because it sits in direct opposition to the dominant religions of the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
The bedrock of much of Indian spirituality is ahimsa.
Nonviolence.
Exactly,
Yeah.
nonviolence. So witnessing a literal blood sacrifice creates an immediate, severe intellectual paradox.
It's a paradox that just short-circuits your brain. Like, we associate these spaces with absolute reverence for life. Finding a blood sacrifice mere feet away from the chanting feels like walking into a world-renowned, deeply serene vegan peace retreat and then discovering a bustling, smoke-filled steakhouse right in the center courtyard.
That's a great analogy. You cannot reconcile the two things.
Actually, I was listening to an episode of Rainn Wilson's Soul Boom podcast. He was interviewing the religious scholar Reza Aslan, and they were talking about this exact kind of cognitive dissonance. They got into how sanitized modern spiritual spaces have become and how we've basically just edited out the raw, bloody, terrifying aspects of ancient worship.
We definitely like our spiritual spaces to fit into neat taxonomic boxes, like ahimsa means do no harm, therefore a temple must be a place of absolute sanctuary. But Tantra, which is the esoteric tradition presiding over Kamakya, operates on a radically different framework.
Yeah.
It doesn't reject the physical or the visceral. It actively embraces them as pathways to the divine, transmuting base energies into spiritual power. But you're right, witnessing the physical mechanism of that is deeply shocking.
And that shock is exactly where our guide for today's deep dive comes in. Today, we are following the investigation of a man named Osman. He is also known as the blind Muslim yogi.
The title alone tells you we're dealing with a deeply complex individual. He exists at the intersection of multiple, often conflicting worldviews.
He really does. Now, before we dive into his reaction to this sacrifice, there is some crucial context you need to know about Osman. Osman is permanently blind, but he has only been blind since May of 2023.
So he lived almost his entire life with completely normal eyesight prior to that.
Exactly. So when he describes the world, he draws from a massive, highly detailed visual vocabulary. For this specific investigation, he is analyzing his experience of having watched a video of this exact Kamakya sacrifice prior to losing his sight.
That's vital context. He isn't speaking abstractly. He remembers the visceral reality perfectly. And we should probably establish his credentials, too, because they form the lens through which he analyzes this whole paradox.
Definitely.
Osman is a master-level bioenergy healer. He's been practicing healing along with advanced yoga and meditation for 50 years. In fact, he attained his first samadhi experience at the age of 19.
19, which is wild. Like reading something straight out of Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi.
Exactly. And his methodology is intense. There were stages of his life where he practiced up to 18 hours a day.
Yep.
Even now, just to sharpen the sword, he practices 8 to 10 hours daily.
And what really fascinates me is the specific mechanism of his healing. He utilizes telepathic healing capabilities.
Yeah.
He operates on the principles of quantum entanglement, specializing in critical pair recovery and terminal illnesses.
The concept of quantum entanglement applied to biology is such a fascinating frontier. In quantum mechanics, entanglement happens when two particles become so deeply linked that the state of one instantly influences the state of the other, completely regardless of distance.
Spooky action at a distance.
Right. And Osman applies this to bioenergy fields. He links his highly cultivated high-frequency energy field with the patient's field to induce a healing response. I know Dr. Deepak Chopra has discussed similar models of quantum healing, proposing that the mind and body are just localized expressions of a non-local quantum field. Osman basically uses that theoretical framework as a practical, applied technology.
It's important to note here that Osman is incredibly pragmatic about his role. He offers his services on a complementary basis. He's very clear that he's not a replacement for the medical field, but an enhancement to address what might be lacking energetically.
Which is a very responsible approach.
Yes, very. Now, because of his 50 years of rigorous study and his high success rates with severe cases, his energy healing services operate at a premium level, and his consultation fees are not inexpensive.
Right.
But, and this is a huge but, he doesn't gatekeep the foundational knowledge.
Not at all.
His mission is to encourage a scientific, results-based approach to ancient yoga, and he offers a ton of this through his free YouTube channel. Plus, he has a completely free 5-minute yoga and meditation program available for download right now at his website, yogawellness786.com.
Which highlights his core philosophy. He wants to strip away the unnecessary complexity. He approaches spirituality not with blind faith, but with empirical rigor. Swami Vivekananda talked about this constantly merging Western scientific empiricism with Eastern spirituality. Osman wants to know how the engine works.
Exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to follow Osman down this rabbit hole. We are going to figure out how this temple legally and spiritually justifies sacrificing a massive bovine in a country that reveres them.
And what that teaches us about the arbitrary lines we draw in our own lives.
So let's start with the video itself. Osman is watching footage from the Kamakhya temple, and there's a woman in the video witnessing the sacrifice firsthand. The way she describes the event is incredibly eerie. She's looking at this massive animal, essentially a large bull, and she notes that it was staring directly into her eyes.
That eye contact instantly elevates the psychological stakes. It shifts the sacrifice from a mechanical ritual to a deeply relational exchange.
Right. But then something wild happens. She says that suddenly, just moments before the blade falls, the animal became incredibly calm. It stopped fighting completely, almost like it accepted its fate. And then she claims that the exact moment the creature died, she physically saw lights emanating from its body.
Wow. From an esoteric tantric perspective, that description is basically textbook validation of the ritual's efficacy. The mechanism here is how Tantra views life force, or prana. A sacrifice is seen as a technology for the forceful, explosive release and transfer of vital energy.
I was actually listening to an episode of Buddha at the gas pump with Rick Archer. He was interviewing Dr. Bonnie Greenwell.
Oh, the Kundalini Authority.
Yes. She's a massive authority on Kundalini awakenings. They were discussing how sudden, violent, energetic shifts in the body can produce literal visual phenomena, like the perception of inner light or intense heat. Are you saying the woman in the video was perceiving a sudden pranic release?
Precisely. The mystic Gopi Krishna wrote about these intense sensory phenomena as well. That sudden calmness in the animal isn't just exhaustion. It's a profound shift in consciousness, as its energy field prepares to separate from the physical vessel. The perceived lights are the observer's visual cortex interpreting a massive burst of subtle energy.
Okay, I get the mystical mechanics of it, but Osman, despite being an energy healer who literally works with telepathy, has an intensely grounded, stubborn reaction to this. He doesn't focus on the mystical lights. He hits an immediate mental roadblock. He's thinking, wait, this is India. Isn't killing a cow completely illegal?
His confusion is entirely warranted. The reverence for the cow, the Gau Mata, is interwoven into the fabric of Indian society. Swami Sivananda of the Divine Life Society wrote extensively about the cow as a symbol of cosmic bounty, an entity that gives selflessly.
And it's codified into modern Indian law. In many states, slaughtering a cow carries heavy prison sentences. So Osman is looking at a massive collision between strict law and a sacred ritual.
So he does what we all do when we hit an informational wall. He seeks raw data.
He turns to his AI, Grok, to bypass the religious commentary and just get a factual answer to one question: how are they legally getting away with this? And the zoological revelation Grok spits back blows the whole thing wide open. Grok explains that the animal in the video is not a Bus taurus or a Bos indicus, meaning it is technically not a standard cow or bull.
Right.
It is a Bubulus gubalis, a
Exactly.
water buffalo.
Which is just
It feels completely absurd. Think about this logically. To the untrained eye, you put a bull and a water buffalo in a field together, and they are essentially the same creature, massive, grazing, horned bovines. And yet, one is the ultimate sacred being, completely untouchable, and the other is permissible to decapitate in a temple courtyard. How is that not just microscopic hair splitting?
It is the ultimate hair splitting. But to understand it, we have to look at how human beings use taxonomy to build legal loopholes. I remember a fascinating discussion on the Joe Rogan Experience. Rogan was talking to the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson about species classification.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Tyson made the point that humans are obsessed with drawing hard, arbitrary lines in nature, even when nature itself exists on a gradient. Indian law draws a definitive, hard boundary based on species classification. Beef, meaning Bossus taurus, is sacred. Buffalo bubulus is explicitly not.
It's the great bovine loophole.
Exactly. The law literally states, protect the cow. The temple essentially says, we agree completely. Fortunately, this is a buffalo. It lets an ancient ritual survive completely intact within a modern legal landscape.
It's like finding a zoning loophole that lets you build a radioactive waste dump in a historic neighborhood just because your bricks are classified as a slightly different shade of red. But Osman doesn't just accept a technicality. He starts heavily interrogating the behavioral zoology of these animals.
He's stress testing the moral logic. If protecting the cow is about reverence for a sentient, feeling being, he's asking why that compassion has a genetic boundary.
Right. And he brings up the African buffalo. Now, if you've ever listened to hunting experts on the Joe Rogan Experience, guys like Steven Rinella, they'll tell you the African buffalo is one of the most dangerous, unpredictable animals on Earth. Osman compares that primal temperament directly to a Spanish fighting bull.
Behaviorally, they are mirrors of each other.
Exactly. He even brings up the American bison. Have you ever had a bison burger?
I have, yeah.
It tastes fundamentally like beef. The protein structure, the biology, it's nearly identical. So Osman arrives at this core philosophical question. If the rule is about protecting a gentle creature that feels pain, why does moral sensitivity only apply to a specific genetic code?
That question exposes a profound vulnerability in how we structure our ethics. I was listening to an episode of the Mel Robbins podcast where she was discussing cognitive dissonance with a behavioral researcher, and they made a point that applies perfectly here. Humans have an incredible capacity to wrap localized, arbitrary rules in the grand language of universal truth. We claim our actions are based on universal compassion, but really they are based on highly specific technicalities.
And to see how deep that cognitive dissonance goes, we have to look at the insider perspective of the tantric practitioners themselves. Our source material references a modern practitioner named Dari Nandi.
Dari Nandi is crucial because he represents the practicing voice of this tradition. He defines the operational rules from the inside.
And his rules are strict. He outlines a three-part definition of a modern Hindu. Number 1, knowledge of the scriptures. Number 2, worship of a deity. And number 3, the absolute non-negotiable law, do not eat beef.
Which brings us to a massive structural logic trap.
A huge logic trap. Let's break down the mechanics of this. You have a devout tantric practitioner at Kamakya Temple. They participate in the buffalo sacrifice. Now, in Tantra, the meat from this sacrifice isn't discarded. It is prepared and consumed as prasad.
A blessed offering. The mechanism is that the food has been imbued with divine energy.
Okay, but just apply basic common sense here. A buffalo is a massive bovine. Biologically and culinarily, its meat is basically beef. So if common sense says buffalo meat is beef, then this devout tantric practitioner, by eating the prasad, is actively breaking their own absolute number 1 rule.
By their own definition, they're committing a massive spiritual violation. If common sense were the operating system, the theology would collapse under its own hypocrisy. But technicality is the operating system. Because both scripture and Indian law explicitly state that buffalo is not cow, the theology is preserved by the loophole. They consume the meat, completely secure in their devotion.
I call this a tax loophole for the soul. And before we judge them, we have to recognize we do this constantly in our own lives. Changing the label alters the moral weight. I heard Lewis Howes talking about this on the School of Greatness podcast with a behavioral psychologist. The example was dieting. Someone says, I have a strict rule, I do not eat cake. but then they consume a massive plate of brownies.
And when you call them out, they say, well, technically a brownie is a bar cookie, not a cake.
Yes, the caloric intake is identical, the glycemic spike is identical. But because they swap the label, they feel morally pure.
The label acts as an impenetrable shield against cognitive dissonance. It protects the practitioner's ego from confronting the biological reality. But Osman, who approaches spirituality as an empiricist, refuses to let the label obscure reality.
He absolutely refuses. He wants to know if the spiritual rule holds up to physical reality. And this relentless demand for truth brings us to his intensely specific personal operating system.
Because he's not an armchair philosopher criticizing from the sidelines, his physical practices are the literal engine that powers his healing.
Let's examine how he tunes his vessel, because
Okay.
he treats his body like a high-precision quantum instrument. His diet is incredibly restrictive. We're talking raw, cruciferous, vegan-centered, zero sugar, zero processed carbs, and zero spices.
It is a nutritional protocol completely stripped of culinary comfort, designed purely for energetic function.
Right, but there is one restriction I found utterly fascinating. Osman absolutely bans onions and garlic. Now, in the West, garlic is universally praised. Andrew Huberman did an entire segment on Huberman Lab about the profound cardiovascular and immune benefits of allicin, which is the active compound in garlic. So why ban something so biologically beneficial?
To understand that, we have to step out of Western biochemistry and into the Ayurvedic framework. In yogic science, food isn't just categorized by macronutrients, it's categorized by its vibrational frequency and how it alters prana. Foods are divided into three gunas: sattvic, which is pure and balancing; rajasic, which is hot and stimulating; and tamasic, which is heavy and dulling.
Okay, so where do onions and garlic fall?
Heavily into rajasic and tamasic. Because they are dense root vegetables grown underground, they carry a very heavy grounding earth energy. In the yogic model, consuming them strongly stimulates the lower chakras. They literally heat the blood and agitate the nervous system.
But how does that specifically affect Osman's telepathic healing?
Think about the mechanism of quantum entanglement. Osman has to maintain an incredibly refined, high-frequency energetic state to pick up subtle telepathic signals from a patient who might be thousands of miles away. If he consumes garlic, he introduces heavy, agitated energy. It's like turning on an industrial blender right next to a highly sensitive radio receiver. The garlic creates energetic static.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense. It's not a moral ban, it's a technology issue. He avoids it because it messes with his reception.
Precisely. It's the ultimate expression of spiritual pragmatism.
And that pragmatism leads to my favorite stories from the source material, the pizza incidents. Because when you hear about a guy with a strict raw vegan diet, you picture a rigid ascetic. But Osman is incredibly grounded.
These anecdotes are essential because they show the difference between rigid dogma and functional mastery.
Exactly. So about 6 years ago, someone offered Osman a slice of chicken pizza. Now he's deeply committed to his diet, but he has an overriding philosophical hatred of wasting food. So instead of throwing a tantrum, he just eats the chicken pizza. Then later, a friend buys him what is supposed to be a vegetarian pizza. He's halfway through and suddenly realizes the crust is stuffed with meat. But again, rather than trash it, he just finishes the entire thing.
The most revealing part isn't the act of eating the meat, it's his clinical analysis of his own body's energetic reaction.
Yes, Osman notes that if he had done that decades ago, consuming meat would have completely blocked his healing abilities. It would have flooded his system with that tamasic static, severing his telepathic signal. But today, his energy level is so advanced, his internal engine runs so hot and efficient, that he metabolized the meat without losing his frequency.
That is a profound testament to mastery. In the beginning, strict boundaries are essential because the vessel is fragile. But once the internal fire is strong enough, it can process turbulence. I was listening to Ranveer Alabadia on the Ranveer show, and he was interviewing a Swami about the rules of celibacy and diet. The Swami made a similar point. Advanced yogis aren't bound by beginner rules because their physiological reality has fundamentally changed.
And this brings up a fascinating intersection of identities. He is the blind Muslim yogi. Now, in mainstream Islam, consuming beef, provided it's halal, is completely permissible. There is zero religious taboo.
This is where we see him actively overriding cultural defaults. His avoidance of meat has absolutely nothing to do with religious dogma. It's purely functional.
It reminds me of an Olympic athlete skipping junk food. If you ask a sprinter why they aren't eating a donut, they won't tell you the donut is sinful. They'll just say, it won't help me run faster. Osman respects his Islamic tradition, but he customizes his biological inputs to achieve the precise energetic output required for critical care healing.
He applies the scientific method to spirituality. And that ruthless empirical mentality is what sets the stage for him to violently clash with one of the most entrenched, dangerous dogmas in the modern yoga world.
Oh man, he does not pull punches here. Because he treats biology as the foundational tool, he completely takes aim at the modern gurus. Specifically, he publicly calls out Sadhguru, who is obviously a massive global figure.
Osman is attacking a very specific badge of honor mentality that has infiltrated the spiritual community.
The sleep dogma. There is this pervasive idea, and gurus propagate this constantly, that if you are a truly advanced yogi, your body becomes so efficient that you only need 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. Sleeping a full 8 hours is framed as spiritual laziness. And Osman bought into this. Starting at the age of 10, he strictly followed this dogma, sleeping less than 4 hours a night for years.
We have to pause and consider the severe biological implications of that. You have a 10-year-old child whose brain architecture and endocrine system are developing, deliberately subjecting themselves to chronic, severe sleep deprivation because they believe it's the pathway to enlightenment.
It's terrifying when you frame it biologically. But Osman has undergone a massive pivot on this issue. Today, he looks back at that dogma and explicitly calls it absolutely bad advice. He completely dismantles it.
And he doesn't just dismantle it philosophically, he uses hard cellular biology. He specifically brings in epigenetics and telomeres to explain the literal mechanism of why the 4-hour sleep rule is destructive.
I want to really unpack the telomere science here because the analogy Osman uses is brilliant. Picture the shoelaces on your sneakers. At the very end, there are those little hard plastic tips that keep the shoelace from fraying. Those are called aglets. Telomeres are essentially the aglets for your DNA.
That's exactly how they function mechanically. Inside your cells, your DNA is coiled into chromosomes. At the very tips are these protective caps, the telomeres. Every single time your cells divide, the DNA has to replicate. But the replication process can't copy the very end of the strand. So every time a cell divides, a tiny microscopic piece of that telomere gets snipped off.
I was actually listening to an episode of the Huberman Lab podcast where Dr. Andrew Huberman was interviewing Dr. Matthew Walker. They went incredibly deep into this. So when that telomere aglet finally wears completely away, what actually happens to the cell?
It enters a state called cellular senescence. It becomes a zombie cell. It can no longer divide, and it begins secreting inflammatory compounds into the surrounding tissue. This process of telomere shortening is the literal, verifiable biological mechanism of aging and chronic disease.
So connecting the dots, how does the guru's 4-hour sleep dogma mechanically accelerate this?
It acts as a massive accelerant through oxidative stress. When you consistently deprive your body of deep REM and slow-wave sleep, your nervous system remains stuck in sympathetic dominance fight or flight. This elevates cortisol, which floods the body with free radicals. These free radicals directly damage the DNA and dramatically accelerate the shortening of the telomeres.
Wow.
So Osman is saying to these gurus, you are not becoming spiritually pure. You are biologically guaranteeing a shorter lifespan.
This raises a massive question. At what point does respecting a spiritual tradition cross the line into actively ignoring verifiable human biology? If a man in flowing robes tells you to adopt a lifestyle that destroys your DNA, why do we give the robes a pass? I heard Stephen Bartlett ask a very similar question on The Diary of a CEO. He was interviewing a cult exit counselor, and they discussed how intelligent people suspend their critical thinking the moment spiritual authority is introduced.
We give them a pass because we have a deep craving for transcendence. We want a shortcut. But Osman's thesis is that you cannot bypass the physical vessel. If you destroy the foundation through sleep deprivation, the spiritual structure collapses.
And what I appreciate so much about Osman is that he isn't just a critic. He doesn't just tear down bad advice. He offers sustainable, biologically sound alternatives. Which brings us to how he puts spiritual empiricism into practice.
Exactly. He recognizes that modern people are exhausted and looking for relief, and they absolutely do not need to destroy their cellular health to achieve it.
This is where his pragmatism shines. He offers a completely free, highly effective 5-minute yoga and meditation program. It's designed to be accessible and grounded in physiological benefits without compromising your sleep cycle. You can download it right now at his website, yogawellness786.com. He also offers extensive advice on his free YouTube channel. And for those who want to go deeper, he has a Patreon for paid live lessons. But he is very clear that he doesn't withhold the foundational knowledge. It's all there for free.
That layered offering perfectly synthesizes his core philosophy, spiritual empiricism. Whether he is meticulously analyzing the biological distinction between a cow and a water buffalo, analyzing the quantum interference of garlic, or confronting the biological requirement for sleep, Osman demands verifiable truth. He refuses to separate the spiritual experience from empirical reality.
If a ritual or a dietary rule or confident guru wisdom blatantly contradicts basic biology, Osman proves we have a fundamental duty to question it.
Because if we refuse to understand the mechanism, we are just blindly following labels. And as we saw with the tantric sacrifice, labels can be manipulated to justify almost any action.
Which brings us to the end of what has been a truly wild rabbit hole. We started this deep dive, plunged into the sensory overload of an ancient blood ritual. We went from the paradox of ahimsa to diving deep into the legal taxonomy of Indian beef. We followed the 50-year journey of a permanently blind bioenergy healer who eats meat-stuffed crust pizzas to avoid food waste. And we ended up looking through a microscope at the plastic aglets on our DNA to disprove a guru's sleep dogma.
It has been a remarkable journey that highlights just how fragile our categories of reality truly are. Learning that beef is a strict legal construct, rather than just a biological reality, fundamentally alters how you view human rules.
It forces you to realize that so many absolute truths are really just silent agreements we've decided not to look too closely at. Which brings us to our final thought for the listener.
Think back to the cow and the water buffalo. In that paradigm, the entire difference between a creature being revered as an untouchable sacred mother and a creature being used for a bloody ritual slaughter is nothing but a slight variation in taxonomy. It has nothing to do with its capacity to feel pain or terror.
It's purely a technicality, a loophole.
Exactly. So the uncomfortable question we must turn back on ourselves is, how do we draw the moral lines in our own lives? What are the buffaloes in your life?
Oh, I love that framing.
What specific labels or technicalities have you constructed to make your own contradictory behavior feel acceptable? When you engage in an action that contradicts your core values, how do you change the label so you can sleep comfortably at night? And ultimately, does changing the label really change the underlying weight of the act itself?
Man, that is a question that is going to sit with me for a long time. It is so easy to spot the hypocrisy in a temple halfway across the world, but it is incredibly difficult to spot the loopholes we build into our own daily routines. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it challenged your assumptions. I hope it provided you with a new empirical lens, and I encourage you to keep questioning the labels you live by every single day. We will see you next time.